Let's open up our Bibles this evening to the book of Daniel. Book of Daniel, just a great study. Love this book. Now, last time we were together, I sort of went a little long, I think, in the introduction, so that we only were able to cover about the first 4 verses of chapter 1, and so we're gonna hopefully begin here at chapter 5 and work our way to the end of the book. Now, Daniel is going to say just some incredible things. He's going to say things about what is going to happen 300-400 years in the future. And when we get to chapter 11 is a remarkable chapter. And he's going to be talking about, now this king is going to do this, and that king is going to do that, and then there's going to be a marriage here, and then there's going to be a marriage here, and then this guy's he's going to pretend to be this, and he's going to end up being this. And all of these events, you're talking 300-400 years in the future. And when you see how that over and over again, what Daniel predicted came to pass in history, you're not left with many alternatives. I mean, how did he do it? I mean, maybe he's lucky. Maybe he was lucky. I mean, maybe, if you throw enough stuff out there, I mean, eventually you're going to be right? And yet, I think that as we're going to see, when this guy said, now this king is going to do this, and then this king is going to do that, and then he's going to turn in this direction, and then he's going to turn in that direction, and well, that's not going to work out too well, so he's going to turn around, and he's going to go back here. I mean, how in the world did this guy nail history the way that he did? I think that we're gonna clearly see there is nobody that can be as lucky if it was luck that caused him to be so accurate in his prophetic utterances. Now, another possibility, and we talked a little bit about this last time we were together, is that there were multiple authors, that there was a guy 600 years before Christ. There was a guy named Daniel. He was captured by the Babylonians. He was taken to the city of Babylon. And there in Babylon, this happened to him and that happened to him. But then, 100 years or so before Christ, there was another guy. And this guy was just writing history. This guy was just, telling us what had happened. And somehow over the ages, the history that this guy was writing got all messed up with the writing of Daniel, and they thought it was just one guy. But then you remember we talked very clearly that over and over again we see evidence that it was just a single guy. And of course, the third possibility is that this man was inspired by God who dwells outside of the time domain. There are people with little bitty gods. They just got a little bitty God. And that little bitty God can't really do much. And so you gotta make up excuses for him. But what the Bible reveals is a God that dwells outside of time and space, and a God is able to do whatever he wants to do. Now, over and over again, in fact, 7 times in the book of Daniel, we're gonna hear, I, Daniel, all right? It's one guy. And again, we quoted Jesus out of Mark chapter 13, that Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, singular, one prophet, Daniel. And of course, what he is accrediting Daniel for is Daniel chapter 9. So Jesus did not speak of many Daniels. He spoke of one Daniel. Now, it's very interesting that you have Jerusalem that is just west now of the Jordan River, and then slightly to the south and to the east, you have the region of the Qumran there on the northwest corner of the Dead Sea. This is a very barren part of the world, and it's a place that's got a lot of caves like the one that you see here. And this cave is known as cave number 4. And this is one of the caves that many of the scrolls that make up the Dead Sea Scrolls was found in. One scholar, a guy by the name of Eugene Ulrich, looking at all of these scrolls, manuscripts, he tells us this, that from cave 4, we now have overriding evidence on both points from manuscripts of books indisputably authoritative or canonical, including Deuteronomy, Kings, Isaiah, and Psalms. You look at what the Dead Sea Scrolls have revealed to us, there is no way that you cannot say that Deuteronomy, Kings, and Isaiah are authoritative, that the manuscripts that we have that were written, of course, hundreds of years later than those that were found in the caves of the Qumran, that they are identical. There has been no disruption, there has been no corruption of the text, and that the Dead Sea Scrolls prove that these books are authoritative. And then he goes on, however one uses in relation to Qumran the category of what is later explicitly termed canonical, that would be authoritative. The book of Daniel was certainly in that category. So if you're going to say Deuteronomy, Kings, Psalms, these things, if you're going to say that these books are authoritative, based upon what the Dead Sea Scrolls reveal, then you've got to say the very same thing about the book of Daniel. Now, you remember that in our introduction, you've got Babylon. The Babylon travels up along the Fertile Crescent, and they capture the city of Jerusalem. Now, you remember, it was a very hurried pace, that when we read those first 4 verses, it just comes across that Nebuchadnezzar is in a hurry. We talked about how he's received word that his dad is deathly ill. You've got to get back to Babylon, you, the eldest son, in order to secure your position as being the next king. So he's like a guy, you breaks into a house and you grab a couple of things off the counter and you get out of there. You know, you're not taking a lot of time. It's not like you're backing up the Ryder rental there and you're taking the couches and you're taking the TV off the wall and all of these things. You're there, he strikes. He's there for just a very short period of time, and then he leaves again. Now, you remember that one of the things that made Babylon so great is they didn't destroy their enemies, but they exploited their enemies. They didn't destroy cultures. They came into a culture and they asked, what does this culture have to offer to us that can advance our interest in the world? You know, ISIS, they take over a city, and what do? They destroy the art. They destroy the libraries. They destroy the schools. They destroy everything. That was not what Babylon was about. Babylon was about, what can this culture do for us? What can we take out of this culture, Babylonianize it, so that it will then help us in our purposes? Now, we did the very same thing after World War II. This is Werner Heisenberg, not of Breaking Bad fame. He was the chief scientist of Germany's nuclear program, and Allied intelligence said that this guy was more important than 10 German divisions. We want this guy, and we want what this guy knows. And so towards the end of World War II, there was a race between the Soviet Union and the United States, not to destroy Germany, but to exploit Germany, to get a hold of the chemists, to get a hold of the physicists, to get a hold of the mathematicians, and bring them over to our side so that we can use them for our benefit. And so the U.S. military enacted what was known as Operation Paperclip. And they were zeroing in on 2 of these research cities that were filled with engineers, filled with scientists, filled with mathematicians. And they sent a letter to all of these guys in these 2 German towns. They said, on orders of the military government, you are to report with your family and baggage as much as you can carry tomorrow at 1300 hours, Friday, 22nd of June, 1945, at the town square in Bitterfield. There is no need to bring winter clothing. Easily carried possessions such as family documents, jewelry, and the like should be taken along. You will be transported by motor vehicle to the nearest railway station. You would think, and from there, you will travel on to the west. Now, the reason why they didn't need warm clothing is because many of them ended up in Texas. This is a picture of 104 German aerospace engineers at Fort Bliss, Texas. And so what we did at the end of Germany, at the end of World War II, was not to destroy Germany, but to exploit Germany. And that is exactly what Babylon was doing with the city of Jerusalem. So Nebuchadnezzar says to his talent scout, I want you to go through the high and mighty. I want you to find me the good-looking, healthy, intelligent young guys that are going to be capable of learning what we want them to learn so that we can then put them into our service. And so what we now have, as we get into chapter 1, is how do you turn a Jew into a Babylonian? We're going to have 4 young Jewish guys. And the purpose of the culture is to turn them into what the culture is. Now, the reason why this should be so important to us is what the Apostle Paul tells us in Romans chapter 12 in verse 2. I like this translation. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Don't allow your culture to turn you into something that is contrary to the purposes of God. So how can we live in a culture that is so overwhelmingly strong? We are surrounded by it every day of our life. Well, how was it that Daniel and his three friends were not turned into Babylonians? This is what chapter 1 is going to reveal to us. So beginning in verse 5 now, we read this. And the king appointed for them, all right, this would be these 4 young Jewish guys. They're probably 15, 16 years of age. The daily provision of the king's delicacies and of the wine which he drank. 3 years of training for them. Now underscore that, 3 years of training. Their time in the University of Babylon was 3 years. Now, you want to underscore that because when we get into chapter 2, next time we're together, we're going to see that there might be a problem here. They spent 3 years in the University of Babylon so that at the end of that time, they might serve before the king. Now, among them, among the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, every ancient writer that wrote about the city of Babylon spoke of it in terms of reverence and awe. That apparently to see the city of Babylon for the first time was just a mind-blowing experience. That you've never seen anything like this before. Now, you have to understand that we're talking about 15, 16-year-olds here. Remember when you were 15, 16? Some of us, that's way back there in that rearview mirror, isn't it? But you remember at 15 and 16, you're so impressionable, weren't you? You were still moldable at that age. Now, imagine you're 15, 16 years of age. And now you're being brought to the world's greatest city. Now, all they have known prior to this is Jerusalem. Now, you have to understand, Jerusalem was not New York or London or Hong Kong. You're talking about a third of a square mile. You're talking about something that was less than 150 acres. You're talking about a place smaller than Leo, all right? And imagine all you know is Leo. And then all of a sudden now, you finally are dropped in the middle of New York City. It's going to be a very powerful experience. Babylon was 170 square miles. It covered 110,000 acres. This is hundreds of times larger than anything that they've seen. Can you imagine being these 4 young guys? And you're walking up to this place. Now imagine you've made it now over this outer wall. You've crossed over now the moat. You're now approaching the inner wall where they've got this Ishtar gate, this gate that is dedicated to the goddess of sexuality. The Ishtar Gate is now located in Berlin. The Germans stole it from the Iraqis. The Iraqis, they'd like to have it back, but you know those are Germans. They don't give up very easy, do they? And so they've got the Ishtar Gate right there in the city of Berlin. You'll notice at the bottom, I highlight here, these are 2 guys, 2 humans that are walking through this gate. Gives you an idea of just the massiveness of this. They had these reliefs of these crazy animals just everywhere that you would look. Some were mythical and some were real. And imagine now you're 15, 16 years of age. And you are now being dropped into this crazy culture. Now imagine you and I, we're standing there. And we see these 4 young guys being led into that city. And now we're going to bet. Are these guys going to be able to retain their faith? Are these guys going to be able to stay true to the faith that their mom and their dad raised them in? I'm sure that most of us would say these are lambs being led to the slaughter. There is no way that these four guys are going to hang tough in the face of what they are now coming up against. Remember, there's no rabbi to keep them straight. There's no Jewish mother hovering over them, telling them to be good boys. They are now, imagine, 16-year-olds on their own in New York City. You think they're going to find some trouble? I think so. But not these four guys. Now notice what we read in verse 7. Now to them, the chief of the eunuchs gave names. He gave Daniel the name Belteshazzar. To Hanani, he gave the name Shadrach. To Mishael, he gave the name Meshach. And to Azariah, he gave the name Abednego. So look, separating them geographically from their culture, separating them geographically from the synagogue, separating them geographically from their family is not enough. Now what they want to do is they want to separate them from the faith that they were raised in. Now, we call his three friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but these are the pagan names. These are not the names that they were given. Now, understand, Babylon was an incredibly religious place. Right? You have to understand that in Babylon, you had 55 temples to Marduk that we talked about last time. You had 300 temples to the earthly deities, 600 temples to heavenly deities, and 180 altars to this sex goddess there. All right? So this is a very religious, very occultic place. And now all of a sudden, these four Jewish boys are given occultic names. Now Daniel, it meant God is my judge. It means I'm going to give an account to God. God is the one that I am answerable to. And they changed his name to Belteshazzar, which means the treasures of Baal, a false god. And then we have Hanani, which means God is gracious. A beautiful name. The Lord is gracious. They changed his name to Shadrach, which means illuminated by the sun god. And then Mishael means who is what God is, or who is like God, who is able to do what God is able to do. Now, maybe they said, Mishael, what kind of name is that? What does that mean? Well, that means who is like the God of Israel. And they said, no, we're going to change your name to Meshach, which means who is like Venus. And then we have Azariah. It means Jehovah has helped. Jehovah is our helper. And they change his name now to the servant of the fire God. So you can see now that there is a concerted effort to twist the spirituality of these four boys that were raised in Sunday school. And you look at these names: God is my judge, God is gracious, who is like our God, Jehovah is our help. Now you remember from our introduction that these boys' parents were involved in the revival under Josiah. These boys were born 8, 9, 10 years after that revival began. And I think that as we look at what the parents have named these boys, clearly their lives were touched by God in this revival. And so now, are these boys going to be able to hold on to the faith that they saw and that they received from godly mothers and fathers? Now, the culture is going to try and pry them away from the faith of their parents. Very same thing that we see going on in universities all across our land today. All right, so are they going to be successful? Now, notice this second attempt in verse 8. We read this: but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore, he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now imagine, you're Daniel, you have been ripped from everything. You know, we read this so quickly, we don't understand the backstory to all this. Imagine 14, 15, 16 years of age. A foreign power comes into your community and rips you from everything that you know. Rips you from friends, rips you from family, and takes you on the other side of the world. I would suggest, if Daniel wanted to, he could find plenty of things that he could be angry about, plenty of things that he could be bitter about. Now look, all of us got our stories, right? All of us got our stories of people that have knifed us, people that have lied to us, people that owe us money. And the Bible tells us, brothers and sisters, do not allow bitterness to take root in your life. If bitterness would have taken root in this young guy's life, it would have been ruined. Everything that God wanted to do, it would have been ruined. But this guy now has decided, no, bitterness is not going to control me. I'm not going to be mad at God. I'm not going to point my finger at heaven and accuse God of not loving me. I'm going to purpose in my heart to live consistently with my conscience. Now, isn't it interesting that as you look at this, it appears that Daniel's kind of the ringleader, right? Now, all four of these guys are going to be involved, as we're going to see. They're going to mention they, right? They did this, and this is what happened to them. So all four are involved, but Daniel seems to be the guy that's leading the pack. And sometimes that's the way life is, isn't it? We're all standing in line. Somebody needs to take a step forward. Who's got the courage to step forward? And finally, somebody steps forward, and we see them. Wow. They step forward, and seeing their courage and seeing their resolve, well, that encourages us. That encourages us. If they can do it, then I'm going to do it too. And maybe that's what happened here. Now, Daniel has decided, I'm not going to allow their diet to corrupt mine. Now, understand that the diet of the Babylonians was very occultic. I mean, all of this food, all of the booze had been dedicated to these false gods. Now, it was idolatry that destroyed Israel in the first place. And so this guy is saying, I am not going to fall into the very thing that destroyed my nation in the first place. Now, archaeologists have found lists of over 300 kinds of beer. Beer was the national drink of Babylon. They had white, they had russet, they had light, dark, cloudy. Women were in charge of brewing the beer, and the recipes for the various beers were to be kept by the female gods. We found one ration list talking about those that worked in the palace, where they would be given every day somewhere between 1 quart and 1 gallon of beer, depending upon your rank. So they're drinking beer every single day, and they are eating food that is dedicated now to these false gods. Now, notice that as he looks at this diet and he understands the religion behind this diet, his conscience is offended. Now, I want you to notice that he purposes in his heart. He decides, I am not going to do that. Now, when you purpose something in your heart, the purposing in your heart, it leads to action steps. We all understand that, don't we? Let's say you decide you're going to make some home improvements this spring. You're going to add a 3-season room. You're going to add an addition. You're going to put in new windows, whatever you're going to do to your house. You're going to make some improvements on your home. Now, you don't sit in your recliner and say, well, if God wants me to make these improvements upon my home, they're just going to magically appear. Now, you're not going to do that, are you? You're gonna have contractors coming in, giving you estimates. You're gonna be checking with the neighborhood association to make sure they're gonna let you do that. You know, you're gonna be doing your research. You're gonna be looking on Angie's List and all of this stuff. You're gonna be taking action steps to bring to fruition what you have purposed in your heart. Now look, do you wanna be a more spiritual person? Do you want to be a more spiritual person than what you are? Do you want to grow in your spirituality? Well, you're not going to be sitting in your lazy boy recliner and saying, well, if God wants me to be a more spiritual person, then I'm just Shazam. I'm going to wake up one day being a more spiritual person. No, isn't it amazing that we do things with our spiritual life that we do not do with any other aspect of our life? Do you understand that if improvements are to take place, action needs to happen? Look, you gotta join a Bible study. I'm gonna do that through the Bible in a year thing. I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna go on a mission trip. I'm gonna get involved with Destiny Rescue. I'm gonna get involved with it. You do something. And so here is a guy. He's purposing in his heart. this is what I'm going to do. Now, notice then that we read in verse 9 that now God had brought Daniel into favor and goodwill with the chief of the eunuchs, and the chief of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king. This, of course, would be Nebuchadnezzar, which is a very healthy fear, by the way, who has appointed your food and drink. Why should he see your faces looking worse than the other young men of your age, and then you would endanger my head before the king? So maybe he's noticing that they're not eating. What is your problem? Do you not understand my neck is on the line here? And we will see next time we're together that his fear was well-founded. You did not do to Nebuchadnezzar something that would bring you into disfavor. So what is your problem? Why are you not eating this stuff? Now notice that God has brought Daniel and his friends into good favor. You see, when your ways please the Lord, even your enemies are going to be at peace with you. Here is a guy that wants to make sure that he is right with the Lord, and the end result of that is that even the enemies of God are at peace with him. So Daniel says in verse 11, he said to the steward whom the chief of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please. Now notice, he's not being a jerk. You notice that? Notice he's not being obnoxious, right? Notice the courtesy that he speaks with here. He says, please, test your servants for 10 days and give them vegetables. Give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. And then let our appearance be examined before you, and the appearance of the young men who eat the portion of the king's delicacies. And then as you see fit, then you deal with us. And as he consented with them in this matter, and he tested them now for 10 days. Now, at the end of 10 days, their features appeared to be better and fatter in flesh than all of the young men that ate the portion of the king's delicacies. Thus the steward took away the portion of the delicacies and the wine that they were to drink, and gave them vegetables. And as these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in visions and in dreams. So notice that Daniel lays before this guy a very reasonable compromise, if you will, just a little test. Now let's just do this now for 10 days. If any damage is caused by a diet in 10 days, well, that's damage that can easily be reversed. He's not saying, well, we're going to be on this thing for a couple of years, and then we're going to get down to 65 pounds, and then of course now we're going to be in trouble. But this was going to be very, very attainable for this guy to get his head wrapped around this. All right, just 10 days. All right, we'll kind of see how this deal goes. Now, it's very interesting to me that this 18, 19-year-old guy is on his way to greatness. We're talking about a guy who is going to be instrumental in steering 2 empires, the Babylonian Empire and the Persian Empire. And where does his greatness begin? His greatness begins with a desire not to compromise in the little things. You see, you know how it works, right? You know how it works in our lives, right? You do that one thing you shouldn't have done. And then the next time you do it, it's a little bit easier, right? And then the third time, a little bit, and by the 5th time, you're a pro, right? And so this is a guy that says, no, I'm going to live consistent with my conscience. A lot of times you'll have another believer come to you and they're asking counsel. They want your opinion on something. And I'm convinced that most Christians, they know the right thing. They know the answer before they even ask you for advice. And a part of our job is just to encourage them to do the right thing that they know that they should do. And it's just so important that we do not violate our conscience. That the compromises that we make today is what's going to turn us into the kinds of people that we're going to be tomorrow. Now, this young guy has decided, no, I'm not going to go down the path of compromise. I'm not going to do that. Now, notice that what we're told in verse 18, and this is incredible. Now notice it that he says to this guy, He said, now look, we're just gonna try God. All right, we're just going to try and follow God here, and we're going to see how it turns out. I don't know how this thing's going to turn out. We're going to do it for 10 days, and then after that, you call the shots if it didn't work out well. So notice in verse 18 then that it says that at the end of the days, when the king had said that they should be brought in, that the chief of the eunuchs brought them before Nebuchadnezzar. And then the king interviewed them. Now understand, these are brainiac guys, and they're being interviewed by Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was not Conan the Barbarian, all right? He wasn't a barbarian. He was a highly intelligent guy. He is a bright guy. He is on top of it. And in fact, God will say that he is the greatest world leader that history will ever see. He is a bright guy. And so now he's got all the graduates, right? He's got all the guys with science degrees, all the guys with mathematics, all the astronomy guys, right? And so he's just kind of, they got a little cocktail party going there, and he's just, eating hors d'oeuvres and just, going from, graduate to graduate, and just, kind of talking to them. And, what can you tell me about Saturn, boy? And what can you tell me about, E equals MC squared or whatever? And so he's talking to all of these guys. And they were brought before Nebuchadnezzar. And notice that the king now, he interviewed all of these guys. There was none like them. And therefore they served the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined him. You see, he's zeroing in on, he's asking him some tough questions. This was their final exam, if you will. And he found these four, to be 10 times better than all of the magicians and the astrologers who were in his realm. And thus Daniel continued to the first year of King Cyrus. Now, that little phrase there at the end, that he continued until King Cyrus, is telling us that we are going to follow this guy all the way to the Persian Empire, which means we're going to follow this guy's life for over 70 years. And this is why you remember last time we were together, I told you that Daniel is one of the most remarkable men in all of Scripture. This is a guy that we are following now for over 70 years. And the amazing thing is, we never see him stumble, right? We see Abraham stumble. We see Moses stumble. We see Noah stumble. We see all of these guys stumble. We see David stumble. We see the apostles stumble. But this is the one guy in Scripture that we're going to follow for a long period of time. And this dude, we never see him stumbling at all. He continues now for 70 years. Now notice that God blesses these kids. Now imagine, you're talking, again, 18, 19-year-olds here. Imagine 18 or 19-year-olds in the Oval Office, giving counsel to the world's most powerful guy. I mean, that's what you've got here. You've got these teenagers now. God has done such an incredible work that he now brings them right into the very court. Now, you'll notice that it says now at the end of those days. Now, what was those days? Well, the time that they were to be in the University of Babylon. So that means now between verse 17 and verse 18, we've got a 3-year gap of time. So they have now graduated, and now their classes have come to an end, and now this final exam before the king, and he discovers that that these guys, they are, notice he says there, that they are 10 times greater than anybody else that he's got in his cabinet, anybody else that he's got for advisors. These 4 guys, they are something else. Now, the scene is going to change now as we get into chapter 2. As we get into chapter 2, now the focus is going to be on this guy, Nebuchadnezzar. Now, we find a lot of engravings about Nebuchadnezzar. We find engravings about what Nebuchadnezzar said. Now, you remember that Nebuchadnezzar worshiped Marduk. And we have one engraving that says, "I am Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, the exalted prince, the wise, the pious." I'm thinking he's full of himself. "The chief son of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. To Marduk, my Lord, I pray, eternal prince, Lord of all, guide in a straight path the King whom you love. You have created me, entrusting me with dominion over all people. See, he's a religious guy, but he's worshiping the wrong God. See, I believe that he is a guy that has very little patience for nonsense. He was a guy that needed to see authenticity. And when he didn't see authenticity, as we're going to see next time we're together, he gets a little ticked off. But he is a guy, I believe at the end of the day, he is a guy that is hungry for God. I believe every person who is hungry for God will find God. I believe anybody that wants to know the true and the living God, God will find a way to get somebody in their life that will reveal to them who and what the true and the living God is. Now, do you understand? Here's the Lord. He sees this great king, greatest king that humanity has ever seen before. And I think the Lord's got a real soft spot in his heart for Oneb. And he wants to reach this guy. And so here's the Lord. How am I going to reach Nebuchadnezzar? I know. There's 4 young guys. There's 4 young guys down there in Jerusalem. They have been raised by faithful mom and dads that were touched during the revival of Josiah. And I know these 4 young guys. And I know that these 4 young guys are going to hang tough in the face of compromise. And they're going to make a stand, and they're going to serve me all the days of their life. And I'm going to take these 4 guys, and I'm going to put them in the life of this self-righteous, prideful, arrogant human being, and I'm going to use them to bring him to the saving knowledge of myself. Now, the thing that would ruin the plan of God would be if these 4 decided it's not fair. It's not fair. It is not fair that we were taken and overrun by the Babylonians. It's not fair. I miss my family. I miss my home. I miss my friends. I miss everything that I had. But it is not fair that God has me here. Again, if they would have copped that attitude, it would have ruined the very plan of God. And this is why, circling back to what I said at the beginning this evening, it is important that we do not allow bitterness to take root in our life. Look, bad things happen. You know, we get molested as kids. We are stolen from. We are promised things that people don't follow through. Marriages don't work out. You know, our kids become a real thorn in our side. And, you know, there's just all of this stuff in life that can just make us a little irritated towards our Creator. And the minute that we forget that He is Lord, and the minute that we forget that, look, He is weaving a tapestry of grace and mercy in our life, He is working a tapestry of the miraculous in our life. Look, are we able to sign up for what these 4 young guys signed up for? What they signed up for, what they were compliant with is, God, you do whatever disruption you need to do in my life in order that you might use me. Now, that's a dangerous prayer. Oh, that is a dangerous prayer, isn't it? God, you do whatever you have to do to use me. But it is a prayer of faith. God wants to use you. God wants to use me. And the thing that will disrupt it is when selfishness creeps in there and we decide that our will is better than the will of God. So I think that as we go to prayer this evening, we should be praying, Lord, help us to be willing. Help us to be willing. Give us a heart that, again, wants what you want.